Welcome to the Bend Don't Break podcast. We are powered by The Source Weekly, Bend's locally owned newspaper. This podcast is our eddy in the rushing waters of local journalism. We are glad that you're taking some of your time to listen to us chat with the people who shape our local community.
Thank you to our presenting sponsor, RE/MAX Key Properties, a family-owned full-service real estate brokerage specializing in residential, luxury, commercial, new construction, and ranch and land properties. Their new state-of-the-art facility at 42 Greenwood Avenue is a modern, collaborative space and the new home of the Bend Don't Break podcast recording studio.
I am Aaron Switzer, publisher of The Source and your host for this Bend Don't Break podcast. I am joined today by Katy Brooks, Bend Chamber President and CEO. She served 11 years in economic development for the Port Authority of Vancouver, Washington, was involved in public affairs in both Oregon, Washington, and Alaska. Over 20 years in public affairs and economic development for the ports of Portland and Vancouver. A member of the Oregon State Early Learning Council, board of director for the Washington State Business Association, and like I said, now Bend Chamber President and CEO. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I was curious as a way to start this off of just finding out a little bit more about how one evolves into this position of being the leader, de facto leader of the business community for Central Oregon. What would your university degree in?
My undergrad was in both under and grad was in communications, but like most people, I switched about 5 times. Maybe that's the prerequisite.
Yeah, you have to want to communicate and then not be able to get into a field.
For a brief time, maybe a year, I was a journalism major.
Right. Okay. Great. And so, out of college, what kind of position did you take? What were you looking for?
Oh, dang! Now you're going in the Wayback Machine.
Yeah.
I looked for adventure,
Okay.
Aaron.
Yeah.
I went overseas.
Great.
I did. I lived on a small island called Saipan. It's in Micronesia, and I worked for a Japanese affiliate over there, doing all sorts of stuff. I worked in radio for a little bit, doing promotions. God, what else did I do? I really got my first break in maybe a grown-up career would be a good way to put it.
Right.
Where it's like, let's move where I can windsurf. From that to my first gig at the Port of Portland, and I was doing community relations for them. I worked for the Port of Portland for the better part of 10, 12 years, somewhere around in there. Yeah.
So how does Portland show up on your radar if you're in Micronesia windsurfing and enjoying yourself and thinking, gosh, I really should go to the Northwest where it rains a lot and work at a port?
I was getting the heck out of Portland. That's why I went to Micronesia.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember when I accepted the job, I had to go to Fred Meyer's. This is back before the internet. I'm aging myself. Yeah. And I looked it up on a globe because I didn't know where it was. It's like, oh, that looks good. And I went. But so I got into the port business because I just didn't really have a lot of designs on where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do. But I knew that working for an organization that has anything to do with global trade and connections, that's really where my head was. And I loved working in Port World, I got to say. Yeah. Between the Port of Portland and Vancouver, I've been in the Port World for an economic development for 20 years before I took this job. And I think ports are like the 8th wonder of the world. Yeah. How we get stuff around the world blows my mind. And I'm a geek. Yeah. And we had really great toys. We had cranes that you could drive like a car. They could lift as much as a blue whale. Wow. I mean, and you should have seen Halloween on the port docks.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
What's
Smashing
that like?
Pumpkins.
Oh, yeah.
Like 1,000-pound pumpkins with scrap metal cars and lifting it up. This is back before insurance was really aware we were doing it.
I don't ever get the vibe from port folks that they're party pumpkin smashing kind of photo. It always has that kind of like navy look to it to me from the outside. Yeah.
No, there are great folks in that world, and it's fascinating quasi-public. You really rely on developing stakeholder relations and understanding your relationship with the city because you're a taxing district, and what your role is in providing economic development, but also ports. I spent a lot of time talking about environmental issues and working on environmental issues
Sure.
because if you think about it, ports, we get into the air, the water, everything you can possibly imagine that's potentially messed up. You are doing business on it.
Right.
So that was a really interesting part of the work, I thought.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, I know at least for myself, ports have a pretty big front because the stuff comes in and leaves, and you don't you know they're there, like the Port of Portland, you can see it, but unless you're carting in and going in there, you don't really appreciate, the magnitude and scope of the things that are coming in and out of those ports.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was just down in Savannah for my son's graduation, and Savannah's an enormous port, and one of those enormous shipping container ships came in through there, and when you see one of those things come in, you understand the magnitude of how much commerce is coming in and out of those places and what they mean for those communities in terms of money, commerce. Just like on the flip side, when one of them crashes into a bridge in Baltimore, I mean, then the numbers start rolling out to the general public. I think if everything's running fine in ports, people are like, oh yeah, that's the port. As soon as you start thinking, oh, we're 1 billion down because we can't get anything in here, it changes the scope of things.
Yeah. And where are those Nikes I ordered and all that stuff?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. It's a big deal.
Yeah, I remember also when we were, I traveled down to San Francisco during the pandemic, and they had the port was all backed up because of the regulations, and so you could see all the shipping containers out there, and there was that big lag of stuff coming in, and again, like I had to really strain to see the physical, real reality of that hitting, but you get that scope of like, man, this is just all the trucks that I'm seeing on the road are coming from that, that area.
You're indulging me, geek side here. So yeah, it is a very big deal. And during COVID, when we all were talking about the disruption of supply chains,
Right.
like was happening down there, it's happening still. We don't hear about it as much, but there's still problems of getting stuff around the world. It is very complicated, intricate, and we're all connected. And when canals don't work, when
Pirates attack.
Pirates attack. Yeah, in certain parts of the world. But it really does gum up the works in the biggest of ways.
Yeah. Well, I think you saying that those supply chains haven't been fixed, I mean, there again, that's not something I think that registers for people. They think, oh,
well, they think
the
it's
boats
easy
are
to fix, and it's
Right.
not.
Right.
It's not. It's like, well, why don't we make everything in America? Well, because we don't have the resources, we don't have the people, we don't have the energy, or the energy is too expensive. It's very complicated, and you can't say, gee, we're going to put more jobs in the United States making whatever it is, Slinkies or whatever it is,
right.
and make it so. It's very complicated.
What was your role at the Port of Portland?
When I was at the Port of Portland, I did a bunch of things. I started in community relations. I eventually I managed the public affairs department there.
Okay. Yeah.
But I spent a lot of time, like I said, learning how to communicate with folks who were angry. I worked a lot with the environmental community and with the neighbors for PDX, for the airport noise.
Okay.
So I got a real taste of controversy in your own backyard and how you deal with that effectively. And I learned a lot. I learned so much in working with folks, collaborating on things when you know they may not share your point of view. I still use that skill set.
Oh, I would think you would use
Yeah.
it more in this position than you used it at the Port of Portland.
Yeah, sometimes. Some days. Yeah.
Was that the job you had prior to coming to Bend?
No. I went to work for the Port of Vancouver and ran my last job there was economic development director, and I master planned the waterfront in the Vancouver waterfront. If you've driven over the I-5 bridge,
place,
it's a big deal.
Yeah.
A lot of that was private sector. We had about 13 acres, and we designed a public port, a new public dock.
Yeah.
Zoom info is there, a new hotel, a whole bunch of development. That's really great.
How do you jump from PR to economic development? That seems like a
Because I worked for ports for 20 years, and
Yeah.
you start to dive into things, and it's like, oh, I know how to do government relations.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to go to Washington, D.C. and bring home
Yeah.
$50 million for a new rail line. And
Yeah.
things just kind of evolve in one's career. And I was given a lot of opportunities
Yeah.
and ended up in a really, really interesting job. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So, what puts Bend on your radar? Why?
Well,
why
God,
leave Vancouver
like-
for sunny climes here?
So I feel like I'm repeating what everybody else says. I used to come here when I was a kid.
Did you go to Sun River with your grandparents? That's
Oh, yeah.
I hear that.
You know
a
the
lot.
story.
Right.
But my husband and I bought, just at the end of the recession, we bought a little place here thinking, you know what, we're going to
Okay.
retire here. But yeah, my kids were in grade school.
Yeah.
And we decided, if there's an opportunity to come over here beforehand and get out of Portland and to Bend with the kids still in school, let's take it. And that's what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why the chamber? So what would attract you from? I mean, you're doing economic development, and that is direct hands-on building. Here, you're emerging into more of a, and maybe I'm wrong, but more of an esoteric kind of field where it's more putting your philosophy into work rather than.
Yeah. So chambers.
You can clarify
do
all the
economic-
ways I
yeah.
didn't quite nail that.
Economic development is a pretty broad term, and part of economic development is what EDCO does. They recruit,
Right.
and they do some of the work in figuring out how to make it a viable choice and lure those companies in and help them grow. But economic development is a really broad spectrum, and so what we do is we create an environment that is conducive to business. So that means you advocate. We're talking about housing, childcare, and tax, and incentivizing research and development. And there's some overlap with us, but we're heavy on the policy. Also, working with the city and local government in things like the Central District, things that we know are going to have an economic advantage for us to
Right.
lure new companies, grow the ones we have, working with OSU Cascades, developing their innovation district and the campus there in general for the workforce. All these things are big, hard work.
Sure.
And it takes policy and it takes tenacity. And it's a different thing than recruitment, although it slides in right along with it. So that's what we do. I think we do economic development, a lot of it at the chamber, but it looks different.
Right.
And it pairs well with recruitment. So one of the things about chambers in general that really attracted me when I came on board, I kind of intuitively knew it, that when I came on board that there needed to be some changes
Yeah.
at the chamber. And we
Well,
were
I'm glad you're
operating-
going. That's where I was going next. I was going to segue into changes in the chamber because it does not look the same as it looked prior to your arrival.
No. There's something called the Horizon Initiative, the Association of Chamber Executives. It's a national association. They did this about 8 years ago, I think it was. What it is taking a look at chambers as economic development and business organizations that go beyond what was traditionally thought of.
Sure.
So you would find a lot of chambers across the country now getting involved in social issues. When you look at some of the biggest trends that are happening in the business sector, it actually has to do with luring and retaining employees.
Right.
So if
right.
you have a housing shortage, if you can't find a place to take your kids for daycare,
Sure.
that is economic. That is economic infrastructure. It's workforce
Right.
infrastructure, just as much as a new lot that can be developed for commercial uses. It is absolutely essential economic development work. So that's what I started to take on.
Sure.
Is what's missing here. And there was stuff missing here, and especially during COVID when housing prices went up and childcare was nowhere to be seen and the skill sets of the workforce started to change. You really have to think ahead, and it's your job as a chamber to do that. It's our job to understand what trends are coming, how is that affecting us now? What does that look like 10 years from now? And what metrics and what things need to be into place between now and then so we all thrive and get through this?
I mean, for some chambers, it's their job. But I mean, chambers are across the country, regardless of the national initiative 8 years ago, across the globe. I mean, chamber organizations, some are very passive.
Yes.
Their role is to collect member dues and do some, workforce training things and do coffee clatches and call it good, And while the chamber, I think prior to your arrival, and, I'm dating myself again, had a larger role than that. I don't want to simplify what they did, but they were not as active in terms of addressing these kind of social issues within the community or identifying those as workforce. I think that's, not to completely blow smoke in your direction, but that is the root of the change, I think, that you made when you came was capitalizing on this. To be honest, you could have occupied that office chair and been one of the largest chambers in the state and continued to do the get-togethers and the before work and after work. And so why would you want to dive in and just start really, it's a lot of work.
Well, here's the thing you don't want to have happen is Katy getting bored.
This
is bad.
That's kind
It's
of what it
bad
feels
for
like.
everyone.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. Yeah.
It's bad. Ask my husband, ask my kids.
Yeah.
But setting that aside, I don't know if the chamber would still be here. I really don't. And I don't know if it would have looked anything like the size, even when I came on board. I think this community, if you don't read the tea leaves and understand what this business community at large needs, you are irrelevant. And relevance was the first thing I wanted to be. When I sat down with the group, the first few months I was here, I said, first of all, this is going to be an awesome place, and you guys are all going to get poached because this is going to be, everybody's going to say, oh my God, the chamber's doing so much. Unfortunately, that did start to happen. But the other thing was, what's going to happen is everybody's going to pick up the phone and we're going to be the first call.
Right.
There's something that's in our way. We can't recruit. We can't afford to be here. There's these issues with permitting at the city. Whatever it happens to be, we are the first phone call. And I think that feels like it happened. And this community and the growth path it's been on absolutely needed that.
Sure.
And it's just a matter of really getting to know the businesses that are here, reading the landscape, and stepping up to the plate.
Yeah. When you took on something like childcare, okay, again, all of the initiatives that you want to do, the other component of this is there's a real political aspect to these things. And the chamber doesn't really, I need to go back and probably read more issues of the source to find out, but you haven't been embroiled in much controversy. There haven't been a lot of places where you guys have run afoul or, been caught up in scrums and scraps that would have risen to be coverage. You've done the work, but by its nature, politics invites that kind of thing.
Yeah.
How?
Well, that's
I know this is your communication background, but
you can't see this, but I'm squirming in my seat right now. So here's a couple of things that happened. So when I first started, the chamber was putting in the newspaper, and I really don't mean to criticize here. Everybody's got a different approach, but we were scoring how well the individual city councilors were doing for the business community.
Remember that very well.
And it's like, why are you doing that? And what do you expect to get from that except very pissed off politicians? So what we started to do was, instead of criticizing, what is it we actually stand for? What is it that we need? Can we go there for a second? And you're not going to get anything out of these folks with a big old stick. That's not going to happen. So let's understand who we are.
City councilors love that. They love when you beat them with it. They love when you put it out to the papers that they're
they
not
invite
doing
you to
their
dinner.
job. Right.
But So we took that tack and we revised the vision and the mission, and we really focused on what it has durability that is our initiatives that needs to be done rather than who is doing it.
Right.
And that fundamentally changed everything. Eventually, we decommissioned our political action committee not because we didn't want to take positions on things, but because we wanted to go beyond who was in the seat at the time,
Right.
and talk about what we wanted to accomplish.
Well, I remember our very first meeting when you first came in. I was like, "Please do something about the political action committee." It was so controversial. And talk about being in the press all the time. And I can tell you, for sure that scoreboard was the exact opposite of what we thought small businesses felt. And we advocated for that quite a lot to deaf ears at the time. So,
Yeah, you got to do a lot of asking, because one of the challenges with running a chamber or any organization is making sure you get good feedback and that you're not talking to yourself or in an echo chamber. We do a lot of surveys. We're doing one right now on our own Horizon initiative of getting folks to tell us what's the most pressing issue now and what's 10 years and in between. How do you navigate it? And we do a lot of that. We done polling. We've hired Echo Northwest to do some research with businesses on the impact of the cost of housing and just the cost of living.
Sure.
Get your data, understand your audience and the situation, rather than listening to a few folks that are around the table with you all the time.
Yeah. One of your strongest partnerships that's evolved is the one with OSU Cascades.
Yeah.
I think you identified at a time when you got here just as they were
Yeah.
getting off the ground, and maybe talk a little bit about how that looked as you were coming on, and why them.
I have a great story about this. So I was interviewing. It was the final interview, and my family and we always go to Lake Creek Lodge in Camp Sherman. Anyway, so I drive over here, show up, my shirt's on inside out, which a person fortunately pointed out to me. It's like, God, I've been on vacation. Get with the program. Anyway, I did this interview, felt really good about it. And I heard that OSU Cascades was having this grand opening. The governor was there. It was Kate Brown back then.
Right.
And I thought, well, I'm just going to go down there, see what it is, check it out. So I show up and I go walking into this room in OSU. It's like, wow, brand new. This is great. And everybody's kind of looking at me like, who are you? And I walk in and across the room is Amy and and a whole bunch of the folks from Amy Tykeson, and a whole bunch of folks from the interview panel, and they're all looking at me like, "What are you doing here?" And I don't know. The door was open. I was interested. Anyway, that was my first introduction to OSU Cascades, and I did get the job.
I'm sure they were impressed.
Yeah. Well, so OSU Cascades, I think higher ed and having a community college, I think it's worth saying, COCC is really vital to this economy. But having a 4-year university backed by OSU is probably one of the single most important economic development features of our region, period, bar none. And getting that campus developed and getting it developed, what was really fun, I told Jim Shell, somebody who used to be a community leader here, a business leader, when I came here, I said, I feel like I just walked into a candy store and I have a bag that's as big as I want it to be, and all these things are happening.
Yeah.
And OSU Cascades developed their university based on the industry sectors that were growing here, really responsive to the business community. I'd never seen something like that before.
Right.
They figured out how to fund themselves and made a great deal. I know it was controversial to pick that site,
Right.
but you want a public agency to pick an old dump in a quarry.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones that are going to clean it up and make it into something viable
That was a
and
good
important.
point about it. Sure.
So it was that and the innovation district they're putting in. So they're luring in private money. So you're not depending on the students and the higher education board and the state and the feds to pay for the development of this campus. So I think that it is a huge asset over time. I was thrilled to do everything we did, and the business community to support it and its growth, and it's still growing.
Fortunate. What's the future look like for Katy in the chamber?
Well, so glad you asked. So, we are up for Chamber of the Year, National
I heard
Chamber
that.
of the Year, and I'm so stoked. So we're the top 3. There's 4 different categories, right?
Who are the other 2?
Fox Cities, I think it is, in Wisconsin,
Okay.
and another mid-sized city in Florida, and us. So it's Wisconsin, Florida, and Oregon.
Yeah, no chance Florida beats us out. Okay, let's just take that one right off the table.
I'm with you.
Right.
Although I love to my friends at the ACCE.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
it's really exciting. And so that's been great. Our housing initiative has been fabulous. If I could talk just a second about it, we developed an accessory dwelling unit website.
Mm-hmm.
It's a how-to on how do you get it permitted, how do you get it paid for, how do you manage it over time as a quick and easy way to get workforce housing on the ground. We've just put together a partnership with the City of Bend. So they are pre-approving certain types of housing designs.
Sure.
And they're using our website to get it out so that you have a pre-approved design and an expedited process if you want to build one.
Yeah.
So we're really excited about that. We're still doing our social media program on what we mean by mid-market housing and workforce housing.
Yeah.
And we made our first investment. We raised money to invest in Rooted Homes. It's a deed-restricted property that took really great, I think, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, net zero homes.
Great.
And we're able to conduct a lottery for Bend employees to buy these homes.
Oh,
for under $200,000.
we had one of our employees apply for that. I remember. Yeah.
So there were 7 of them, and they're all occupied. People are living there right now. And it spurred on another 100, 150 more that are in the process of being built in Sisters, Redmond, and Bend right now.
Yeah.
So it was launching that pilot, and we felt really good about our partnership with Rooted Homes. And our next move is we've raised about $500,000 more, and we're investing it in a revolving loan, low interest. So we're doing a 3% low interest loan with
You're branching out.
Habitat for Humanity and a local builder, Hiatus Homes, and we're paying for the construction of a mid-market house on deed-restricted property. We get the money back, we'll redeploy it over time.
Right.
So we're trying new things, and it takes a lot of effort to actually understand where you can enter the market and make a difference. But the idea is if we keep making this cheap money available, we could seed Bend with these mid-market homes where these folks that we've been talking about, the nurses, the teachers, the restaurant managers, whoever, they have a pathway to home ownership.
Sure.
And that's really important to us.
Do you think that, I mean, you talk about it being a seed. Is it a model that can have a larger impact to really there's a lot of people that need those mid-market homes. I mean, how do you get that kind of momentum going? It's the thing we ask all the candidates that come in, they talk about, hey, we're going to really change, you know, housing prices, but it's still market driven, so much of it here is, it looks great.
So here's the bottom line. It won't happen easily. It's just not.
Yeah.
And you got to try all the things. If all the buttons are in front of you, you push them all.
Right.
And we look at our revolving loan. We'd like to grow it. It would be great to have $1 million and go to the legislature and say, can we have a couple million more? Look how great we're doing. But I think that there's also state funds now that incentivize mid-market and workforce housing. The city just got a grant from HUD, $5 million. They're going to deploy $4 million of that into mid-market and other types of housing. We could go alongside them. And maybe there's a project out there in the future that's like, well, we have enough, but it would really be accessible if we had $500,000 or $1 million more, and we can deploy our funds that way. We're keeping it as flexible as possible, so somebody else's good idea or an opportunity is something we can invest in. And we don't have. This is the great thing about not being a public agency. We don't have all the tethers, and we can do what needs to be done to make these things happen.
Yeah, I think that's what's fascinating to me. It seems very nimble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And somebody's got to do that. And that's the chamber.
We are at the end of our time here together. Last thing you would like to touch on before we say goodbye?
Well, I think what's really important is to always look forward. And we talk a lot about childcare and housing, but I think it's also important for all of us to look at the change in the workforce that's going to happen. And I ask this question a lot. What's going to be the big thing that you think is going to be impeding business 10 years from now? And a lot of what I've heard is the same thing, is how do we attract and retain employees if they can't afford to live here and if they can't see themselves here? How do we deal with technology changes and how that's going to change the workforce?
Yeah,
So,
I just saw Edco's AI presentation was just out the door. Any
Yep.
at City Club, we brought up the AI topic, and it's just, oh yeah, we got to do it. That's where everybody's head's at.
yeah, but you got to start doing it,
Yeah.
right? So the people who win are the ones that are starting now.
Yeah,
So there are things like that to watch for as a community to keep us strong and economically diverse.
right.
And that's what I'm excited to do.
Well, it certainly won't be boring. I don't think we have to worry about Katy getting boring in the
that's
near
just
future.
Bad
Yeah.
future.
I don't. None of us want to see that. Well, Katy, thanks for spending the time with us.
You bet.
It's been fun. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron.
You've been listening to the Bend Don't Break podcast, powered by The Source Weekly. To read, hear, and see more of what we do, go to bensource.com.